I mean, I know they've got the place in Mexico, but there's usually a lot of time here.
Okay, it is 4 o'clock. We will call the August 3rd Salina City Commission meeting to order. I would ask staff for confirmation that the Kansas Open Meeting Act required notice has been properly provided.
Yes.
Thank you. With that, we will have roll call.
Mayor Hoppick.
Here.
Commissioner Davis.
Here.
Commissioner France.
Here.
Commissioner Hodges.
Here.
Commissioner Ryan.
Okay. Would all those that are able please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, we have no awards or proclamations. This brings us to Citizens Forum. This is a chance for individuals to come forward with a topic that is not on the agenda. If you come forward, please give your name and address, and we will give you 5 minutes. Is there anyone to come forward during Citizens Forum?
My name is Susan Herman. I live at 741 Willow Drive here in Salina, over by Centennial Park. I walk every day, and I walk over around the park, and it's good for me, but I enjoy looking at the park. Sadly, our park looks terrible and has for several weeks. I called the Parks Commission and I asked why it hadn't even been mowed for at least 2 weeks, and I think maybe longer. The weeds have grown out over the curb, into the gutter, into the street. It just looks terrible. We are so busy as a community trying to make our city look better that it doesn't help if we have a ratty-looking park. And I see no need for it. I went on over to the Friendship Center. I walked down Willow, down Plum, get on Hemlock, and walk around over within a block of the Friendship Center. This morning I decided I would try to go down the ramp with my Cadillac here, and going down that ramp, that used to be so prettily landscaped, and it's been overtaken by weeds. No attention has been given to that for some time. There's a tree limb that's been over there in the park, laying on the ground for over a month. Has not been picked up. I don't understand why. I called and they said they were short-handed. The budget had been cut. I can't remember what else. But you know, I was a supervisor years ago, and if we were short-handed, we figured out a way that we could make the product and what we needed to do, and got it done. I see no reason why we, as managers of a park or whatever, can't do the same. It's not good. And I'm just really sad and sickened by the thought that it's going, if it continues, that is not going to be a pretty little park like it was before. It's not now. Some of the weeds are high enough that they're growing around the fire hydrants. And that's not good either. But I'm Just saying, if it's budget cuts and that kind of thing, we need to look at what we can do to make it better and to get these parks taken care of. They tell me our park isn't the only one that's been neglected, but the neglect is definitely showing. Definitely showing. It's not nice. And I invite everybody to take a drive by there and take a look, because it's not good. And tomorrow we got voting, and people will be going down that sidewalk ramp, the Friendship Center, and it's just a jungle there on that south side of it. It's not good. And I realize there's probably steps I should have taken before coming here, maybe going to the city manager or whatever, but something needs to be done. And it needs to be done now, because anymore, you're not going to have the landscape thing there at Friendship Center. And the south end of that park is going to be overgrown with weeds on the curb in the street. But actually growing in the street. I guess actually I just came to gripe and to let somebody know we need to do something, because you can't let it go. And the grass is getting high enough that nobody wants to go walk through the park like they have. And I'm proud to say that we've gotten more walkers in the area, which is a good thing. But it can also be a dangerous thing if you have a contraption like this and try to go through and stay out of the way of traffic. So I'm just asking, would you please take a look at that and see what you can do to get this taken care of? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I missed your name. Is it Susan? I'm over. I can't tell who's talking, can you?
Yeah.
Is name Susan?
Herman.
Thank you for your comments, and we've been discussing that up here. I live over by Jerry Ivy Park, and we have the same concerns. Just to update you, because of COVID-19, we did furlough and are doing a lot of work share programs, not knowing exactly what our income was going to do. So we did cut staff, and we did tell everybody that it was going to be painful. And we are in the process, I think, of looking at numbers and how some of the sales tax numbers have been coming in, and we're currently discussing bringing some more staff back on. So we appreciate. I know you said you're here to gripe. Well, it's a legitimate gripe. Our parks do look somewhat shaggy now. We know that, and so bear with us, and we'll try to get them back the way they were.
Okay, I hope so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Commissioners, if it's helpful, as you may recall, we typically hire about 88,000 hours of part-time labor, including Kenwood Cove. We didn't hire, as part of the budget cuts this year, we didn't hire any of that. And then with the work share that you described, we took our mowing and maintenance staffing to 20% of what it previously was. So you have all the part-time staffing that we didn't bring on board, and then we took our full-time staffing down to 20%. So next week, staff plans to present to you a financial update and study session, which will be the opportunity to report out to you what we know about April and May sales tax activity or sales activity, and then I think we can start to have a conversation about staffing levels.
And of course, of all years, we would get a bit of a rainy summer, so everything's green and growing. You know, a lot of years we don't have to worry about that. So, okay, next.
Commissioners, Dalton McDowell, 514 South 9th. Some of your parks, I would give Rick and his crew, they're doing an amazing job with what they have, with forestry only having 2 to 4, I believe. I cannot remember what Rick told me. And the forestry supervisor on a mower every day. They're doing a great job. I actually met with them last Monday. Doing a great job. But if we don't get something done with your flower beds and all your pruning and stuff at these parks, you're going to most likely be looking in the 6 figures to get it back to what it used to be. But I understand with budget cuts, it is what it is. But Hutch, and I looked at some other towns with about around the same population, they cut their office staff They did not cut their parks, rec, and their street division, their public works staff. They cut their office staff. I don't know, it might be too late to do something like that. But all I am going to say is Rick is doing as best as he can with as low money as he has to do it.
Thank you, Dalton. And I do believe you can answer this, Mr. Scragg, but we did cut office staff also.
Correct. The first thing we did was we classified employees as essential and non-essential as it related to the emergency paid sick leave provisions, and everyone that was identified as non-essential was put on some type of work share. So administrative staff, office staff, and employees across the organization. The police was fairly unaffected other than detectives and some admin staff. Fire and ambulance were fairly unaffected. The remainder of our organization participated in work share across the board.
And Dalton, if it makes any difference, I think I can speak for the commission here. None of us are being critical of park staff. We understand they're understaffed, and that's the reason it looks that way. So, yeah. So, yeah. Nonsense. You said that, not me. So, do we have anyone else that would like to come forward during Citizens Forum?
Luke Stanford, Salina, Kansas. I just wanted to say that, so 2 weeks ago we gave a policy proposal about the policing in Salina and the pros and cons of an LAAB and such. I was just wondering if we can get any sort of idea of, like, has the ball been like sort of rolling on that or anything like that? And I also just wanted to ask if we can kind of get a commitment to, like, September 7th. It's a Monday. It's, I believe, 49 days afterwards, because we did say we would try to stick to a 45-day time frame. And so I was just wondering, I understand that there's a lot of other stuff that's going on right now, but I was just wondering if we can get any sort of update on that. But that's just the only thing I had to say.
We'll let Mr. Scragg address. I know they're working on that. I'm not sure we're a hard set date yet as when we're going to do a proposal.
Well, actually, staff's meeting on a regular basis to respond to the topics that we identified. September 7th is Labor Day, so you won't have a regular city commission meeting on that date. The 14th, we've scheduled a tour of the Lee buildings in conjunction with an action item that should be coming forward. So we have on your calendar for September 21st a study session presentation on that topic.
Thank you.
And it wouldn't be possible to go to the study session prior to Labor Day?
I don't have the agenda planner called up, but I think we looked at that and ended up on the 21st for a reason.
Okay. Anyone else for Citizens Forum?
John Ratzlaff, Salina. I'm here to talk about ethics again. A couple years ago, I started talking about it, about the ethics policy and training for employees or board members, because the board that I'd served on for 5 years, ending 1 year ago, had never had the training. I understand they still have not, even though I brought it up repeatedly. So there was an ethics policy adopted June 2017, and that is number 17-7463. It was followed with resolution number 17-7469, adopted August 14, 2017. And I want to point out a couple things it says. Section 3, Guidelines for Operations. It shall be the policy of the City Commission to follow the guidelines outlined hereafter regarding the operation of citizen boards, etc. Under B, Orientation. All new board and commission members shall complete orientation training within 90 days of their board appointment. City staff is directed to provide the required orientation training and related materials for all new board and commission members. This orientation training shall include, but not be limited to, and it goes through several things, a review of the ethics policy. The city clerk's office will provide all committee members with orientation material applicable to service on all city boards and commissions. Under F, annual training. For those boards and commissions that meet on a regularly scheduled basis, city staff shall provide annual training regarding the ethics policy of the city of Salina. The city manager shall ensure that all department heads and board liaisons are also adequately training regarding the ethics policy of the city of Salina. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was just going to ask where we do stand on that, because we had a pretty vigorous discussion at our last meeting regarding a planning commissioner who participated in a meeting and then later was asked to recuse himself. And I mean, obviously, we've had that in the very recent past. But going forward, I mean, Ms. Ratzlaff read us our own policy, which we don't appear to be following. So how do we fix that?
With respect to the Planning Commission, with respect to the boards and commissions supported by Development Services, I think they've had a protocol in place for quite a while that on an annual basis they do that. Part of the issue is attendance, and part of the issue is standardization. So the two things that I've been trying to work on is a different approach where we're not dependent on physical attendance at one meeting at any given point in the year. So you may recall that we conducted a session with the Kansas Attorney General's office as related to Kansas Open Meetings, Kansas Open Records. That was, all board and commission members were invited, as well as other bodies beyond just the city of Salina. I can't tell you what the attendance was, but we had a fair number of people there, but nowhere near full attendance on the part of the invitees. So the intention is to try to, and we took video of that with the permission of the Attorney General's office, which struck me as a little bit ironic that we had to have a conversation about whether we could record their presentation in an open meeting. But nonetheless, we recorded it with the intention of trying to edit that down into some type of video and then supplement that with additional training that we then could make available for individuals to watch at their convenience and certify to city clerk, you as city commission, something along those lines that they have personally watched it, so that we can create an expectation that the training is there, it's standardized, it's not dependent on staff at any given meeting and verbally presenting it, but we have built a body of information that we can then share and direct people to, and then ask them to affirm that they've viewed it. We've yet to get that completely built, but that's the model I'm trying to transition to, because our past practice was we would conduct training, but we had I don't know how many meetings it would practically take to get the level of participation that would be expected. I don't know that we could accomplish it.
I think maybe, Commissioner, and I appreciate that, and you'd shared that with me about trying to get some sort of virtual training option, which I think is a great idea. But something, Commissioner Davis had brought up last week was about, if you haven't, I mean, we've laid out our expectations, I think, very clearly. And, if you haven't, if you did not attend the meeting where that was covered, since we're doing it still in person at this point, and frankly, I don't know how long it's going to take to get a virtual training option up and going. I mean, 6 months. I mean, so I guess my question is, how can we, make that an expectation that unless you've completed the orientation and you've had the training on ethics, you're not going to participate, especially in the boards where I see that it's easy to have a conflict of interest on. I mean, I'm not sure that I see this so much with the Heritage Commission, but planning or Board of Zoning Appeals, I would think that would be pretty natural.
I completely understand and support the expectation, and there have been previous conversations about if you have not gotten that training, you don't get to participate. The practical difficulty is, given the number of boards and commissions we have and the number of appointees we have to them, and the inability to get the attendance level we need, if the model is in-person staff training, I think we could do it twice a month for 6 months and not get there. So for lack of a video, I think it may be a handout, a workbook, something. I mean, our model for years has been we offer the training, but it's voluntary. The added aspect that I understand you adding to the equation is conditioning participation on the training. That's where mandatory attendance or 100% attendance is a challenge. So I think, we have PowerPoints from the Attorney General's office on open meetings, open records. I don't know that we have a PowerPoint at the moment, but we can create one on the ethics policy. But it's a pretty complicated topic. I don't know that bullet points are necessarily going to convey the message either.
Well, and I may be the only person that feels this strongly about that training, and obviously if there's not a consensus with the governing body as a whole, but I guess my feeling would be, and this may die right here, that participation is conditioned upon attendance or completion of the appropriate materials, or we need to go back and we need to rescind our ethics policy, or at least revise it substantially, so we take out the words shall and substitute may, and because we're not following our own resolution, so.
Could we bring this back up in other business? Just, I think.
That's fine with me.
We
I would be for that. I'm a little bit concerned also from the standpoint, 2017 was 3 years ago. And it just strikes me that there ought to be a way to get this done. And if nothing else, somebody shows up for a meeting, they're sitting here at the dais, they haven't received the training, staff member takes them aside into that room and they run through the 30-minute orientation with them. Have a staff member who can do that at whatever meeting this person first shows up to, so that just because they miss the meeting where the orientation is provided to the full board, they don't get to say, oh, I missed that meeting, so, I didn't take it. I just think it's a matter of the first time they show up, they get pulled off for that training on an individual basis if they haven't had it as part of the group. That's one suggestion. And maybe I'm too far in the weeds, but it seems to me that there ought to be a way to make this happen. Other business is fine.
Okay. We'll bring it up under other business. Okay. Any other citizens' comments?
Santiago Vasquez. I live in Salina, Kansas. Like my friend Luke here, we're back, just to continue asking and getting updates on how progress is going. I know he specifically asked about the CRB and how that process is coming forward. And once again, I just want to reiterate that we would like to know how progress is moving along as progress is moving along, so that we're not just sitting here waiting for September 21st to roll around and, having to have it all laid on us immediately at that point. So we would like some way to get updates on a regular basis on how that's working. The feasibility of that, I'm not entirely sure, but that is what we are asking for. Additionally, the other part of that proposal was the ban on 1033, which I know that there was discussion on this board about, even if there wasn't a ban, that there would be an increased oversight where the police would have to continually ask for permission before making those purchases, which I think is something that is relatively agreeable to most people, since our police are a public body and are therefore supposed to be held accountable for their actions and decisions and purchases. And on that front, right? The implementation of a change on how we use use the 1033 program isn't the same as creating an entirely new citizens review board. So I am a little bit at a loss here for why we also have to wait the same 47 days before we're getting an update on that. Additionally, it does concern me that I have not heard 1033 mentioned throughout the dialogue of those 47 days, so I'm not entirely sure, and it is not confirmed yet that the City Commission or the staff are taking consideration on that. We would also like updates on how the City Commission is planning to address that issue as well, since it seems that it's easier to make a decision on that, or at least it is a shorter term goal, and I know that we are concerned with addressing the low-hanging fruit initially. So those are just my first two main things. Additionally, I will also echo the sentiment on the ethics board. I know one thing that was said was having a standardized set of things to review for ethics. The questions there would be, how do we know that the standardized, right, like what is standardized is good, and how do we measure that? How do we ensure that that is a proper way of training people in ethics, because ethics is something that is obviously very complex, but it shouldn't be hard to implement, right? If you have a conflict of interest, you clearly should not be making a decision on that same thing. And so on that note, we additionally have another pretty big ask that we haven't talked about in a while, and that is on the part of the Salina Police Excellence Fund. For any of those people who are following us on social media, we recently released some email interactions we had with the president of the Excellence Fund, saying that they are not, we asked how if we could know how much money they are collecting and what that money is used for, which to us seemed like a reasonable ask. They responded by saying they don't release their membership list, which we found odd because we didn't ask for members, but also that they would not tell, that those funds were private and we would not be allowed to see them. And it was weird because we initially asked Chief Nelson for that information, since we thought the police department would have to report on how they use money or the money they receive, but that wasn't found under the city budget. We found it a little odd. He then sent our email off to the president of the Salina Police Excellence Fund, who then said that the Salina Police Excellence Fund isn't officially affiliated with the Salina Police Department, which seemed a little disingenuous to us. So on that front, we also asked the question of, can we get, is there a way to see how much money the police department is actually getting, not just from the city, but also from other means, because it would help us get a larger picture of how much money is truly going into the police department and how they are using that money, whether that money is used to purchase equipment. I know they have revealed a few instances of the usage of that money on their Facebook page. I know they recently helped out someone's family member on the police department, and if that's all that's happening, that's totally cool and fine. We just want to make sure that there's transparency on that front, that we know how that money is being used. Otherwise, it seems just a little odd that a public facility is getting private funds and not making those public as well. And we don't appreciate that we are being hit with the wall of, we're a private entity, so we don't have to tell you anything. Those are really our main concerns, and yeah, that's all I truly have. Thank you.
I'll try to address some of that, Santiago. I believe the 1033 will be on our agenda at the same time we discuss the other stuff. And it's my thoughts that the city, the staff will not be coming back to you for input on, they will be doing their research. I think under the Kansas Open Meeting Act, you'll be getting the information of their requests and their study at the same time we get it, and the rest of the community. If I have that right, would that be right?
That's definitely correct. I mean, the staff presentation will be an overview and decision points for you as a governing body, and until you've had an opportunity to receive that, discuss it, deliberate, and provide staff some direction, we're not in a position to have a side conversation in advance of your consideration. That you ultimately are the deciding body.
Yeah, that would be mine. That to meet all the requirements, it'll be presented to all of us at the same time. So.
Once again, Santiago Vasquez from Salina, Kansas. We are not asking the City Commission and staff to meet with us on the side. We are asking that there is some sort of way to measure progress that's accountable, not just to the Sunflower Coalition or anything, just is there a way the community knows that there is progress being made?
We've stated we're making progress, and we'll have something presented on September 21st.
Before the 47 days was the question.
I guess we have nothing. I mean, I don't know what you want. They're doing their research.
You assign this, but that's not. We don't have a loading bar graph on a project that identifies we're 18% complete. We have a deadline. We know the deadline, and frankly, depending on the rest of our workload, there may be a hard push in the last 2 weeks to try to get things wrapped up. We, as staff, we are meeting on a regular basis to have the conversations to make sure that we are making preparations. But beyond that, all I know to do is assure you that we're working on it and we're aware of the date that we committed. We'd be ready to make a presentation.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other citizens? Okay, we have no public hearings or items at this time, so we will move into the consent agenda.
Item 6.1, approve the minutes of July 27th, 2020.
Okay, any corrections or additions to the minutes? If not, I'd accept a motion to approve.
Mayor, I move we approve the minutes of July 27th, 2020.
Second.
We have a motion to approve the consent agenda 6.1. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That passes 5-0. Leads us into administration.
Item 7.1, second reading, ordinance number 20-11025, changing the zoning district classification from R2 to I2 on a vacant lot facing Reynolds Street, addressed as 535 Reynolds Street.
Okay, I do not believe we've received any comments since last meeting. Are there any questions of staff? If not, are there any comments from the public? If not, I will bring that back before the commission.
Mayor, I move we approve ordinance number 20-11025 on second reading.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 20-11025 on second reading. We will have a roll call.
Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner France.
Aye.
Commissioner Hodges.
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan.
Aye.
Mayor Hoppeck.
Aye. That passes 5-0. Leads us to 7.2.
Item 7.2, second reading, ordinance number 20-11026, changing the zoning district classification from R to U district for 8 lots located on north side of Illicit Avenue, east of North 9th Street.
Okay, I do not believe we've received any comments on this one either. Are there any questions for staff? Are there any comments from the public? If not, I will bring it back to the commission.
Mayor Hoppeck, I move that we approve on second reading ordinance number 20-11026.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 20-11026. We will have a roll call.
Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner France.
Aye.
Commissioner Hodges.
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan.
Aye.
Mayor Hoppeck.
Aye. That passes 5-0. That will bring us to 7.3.
Item 7.3, rezoning of former Lowell Elementary School. 7.3A, second reading, ordinance number 20-11027, amending the future land use designation of this 2.04 acre tract of land from public, semi-public to urban residential.
Okay, we do have 2 second readings here. We will do the first one. I do not believe there was any change to. That would be 7.3A. Are there any questions on the future land use designation from the commission for staff? Any comment from the public? If not, I will bring item 7.3A back to the commission.
Mayor, I move we approve ordinance number 20-11027 on second reading.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve on second reading ordinance number 20-11027. We will have a roll call.
Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner France.
Aye.
Commissioner Hodges.
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan.
Aye.
Mayor Hoppick.
Aye. That leads us to 7.3B, and I will, is Laura, yep, that's all right. Didn't see you sitting there, so I'll turn it over to you.
Very brief staff report. As you'll see in your packet, what you asked us to come back with at this meeting is, I believe Dean is giving you some additional information, was essentially two issues to address. One of those being the actual, how the PDD zoning was going to be doled out. The application was originally brought to you as a PDD R2, and the request was to, one, amend the legal description to truly call out the two phases, and then within that to create the PDD R2 over the half of the property that is currently where the school resides, and of the vacant half of the development to be PDD R1. And that would be single-family residential. That was what had been proposed under PDD 2, but the desire of the commission previously had been to make this more clear so that anyone looking at that zoning map would know half of that was meant to always be single-family residential, and, or not always, but to be clearly identified as single-family residential, and the other to be identified as having a higher density with the school district and or the school building and apartments. The other issue you asked the applicant to address and work with staff on is the parking lot. Turning the building into apartments created a situation needing to have off-street parking for the residents. There was a small cement area that had been previously used, I think occasionally for delivery trucks and things like that, but predominantly for playing basketball and as a play area. Concerns from the residents regarding the visibility, particularly when you were coming through the intersection of Highland and Republic, of having that be what people saw. The commission asked for not only the parking entrances on Republic to be better addressed, since that is such a narrow road, but also to address line of sight. And that has been addressed predominantly through the 10-foot buffer that Commissioner Davis asked for. And then also the developers proposed a new design that's in your packet, and it shifts the parking lot almost to the center of the two parcels, so away from the intersection, and better combines it with the through road that had already been identified for the dual entrances, creating better flow of traffic, dispersing the cars and having greater visual impact. And I will say too, when the development comes through, a landscaping plan would of course be required. So in addition to that 10-foot buffer, there are additional planting requirements too that deal with the visibility of the parking lot. With that, before you is the opportunity to approve this, of course, or amend this, or ask staff to go back and do additional work. And we are happy to answer any questions, and I believe a representative of the applicant is here.
Okay, do we have any questions of staff at this time?
I guess the question that I would have for you, Ms. Driscoll, is you said the landscaping would come back to us at a, or would come back to the Planning Commission at a later date and be developed at a later date or whatever. Specifically called out, though, in a document that one of the neighbors, Mr. Peterson, presented to us. There's an area noted on the east side of the parking lot, and there's no landscaping that's shown on that east side of the parking lot. Is that something that would be, there will be landscaping on
Yes,
on that?
typically when the landscaping plan comes in, which gets into much greater detail,
Right.
there is a requirement for a greater visual buffer around the parking lot in its entirety.
Okay.
And the focus of what had been proposed by the developer was primarily on that public sight line, along the sidewalk where the public is interacting with that parking.
But to be clear, when the landscaping plans come back, there will be a buffer on the east side of that parking lot, or would that be more helpful to be spelled out?
I think the
It's
question is
actually
actually
the west side.
Oh, I'm sorry, the west side.
Yeah, I think
Sorry.
it's the west side.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
It would not be required by code
Okay.
to go that full way. It's meant to, the purpose of the buffering around a parking lot like that is those visual components where it's going to have the most impact from the public. So some of those inner portions where it's the inside of the development, those are not necessarily where the landscaping buffering is predominantly seen.
Right, and I understand that, but I think you'll agree, and I realize you're probably just receiving this as well. If you are a property owner in the, whatever that is, the 1000 block, 1100 block of Highland, you're going to be looking directly at that parking lot. And I'm just wondering, I know this is a second reading.
You talking about the block north of Republic or south of Republic?
It would be south of Republic, like the people that live, right.
The parking lot would be behind the building.
But there's part of it that's right here by where the old playground is.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, either Ms. Driscoll or Mr. Andrew, but we do have language that requires buffering where parking adjoins single-family residential. The question in my mind is this is kind of in the middle of the lot, so
Right.
would we interpret that as it adjoining residential such that it's required, or do we need to clarify that as part of this action?
I've reviewed the handout that I gave out to you. The drawing reflects a buffer between the public street and the parking lot. That is required by city code. Because of the distance between the west side of the parking lot and Highland, it's a distance that would put the west edge of the parking lot not within the front yard on Highland. So to clarify, as a zoning administrator reviewing a landscape plan, I could not require the developer to put a buffer along the west side of the parking lot because it's not in a front yard. You, as commissioners and as reviewers of a planned development district, have the authority to impose that as a condition in addition to the 10-foot buffer along Republic. If you think it's important that there be a buffer along the west side of the parking lot, you can make that part of the planned development district. But just as far as the city's landscape regulations, they would not require a buffer along the west edge of the lot because it's far enough distant from Highland Avenue that it's not considered to be in the front yard. It's within your discretion to consider it to be in the front yard, but as zoning administrator, I couldn't require it.
It should be noted, staff did not receive this comment, so that's why it's not in your packet until later this afternoon, so.
So is that, I'm going to look at Mr. Scragg, I think, or Mr. Bankston. So is that something where within the ordinance, when we take action, is that something that we should call out in a specific section, like under, I was just looking at where it looked logical was under section 3B?
Yes, I think that is the section that addresses, it has the current language about buffering in it, and if you're inclined to add to that, that's the place to do it.
Okay.
Just out of curiosity, what type of buffer would you be thinking? My East Coast background now sees a parking lot with buffering on 2 or 3 sides, which then becomes a security risk if I come in at 10:30 at night. It's just something else to consider, but...
If it's helpful, I may put Mr. Andrew on the spot again. By code, can you describe to the City Commission what constitutes a compliant buffer?
What we would require, if that by code was closer to Highland and it was, or if I talk about the buffer on Republic, it would consist of low-growing shrubs that grew to a height that didn't exceed 3 feet, because we don't want to obstruct visibility of vehicles exiting onto Republic. And then interspersed with that at intervals would be ornamental trees. But if we applied that same standard to the buffer, and you wanted to see a buffer on the west side, then that would consist of low-growing shrubs and then at intervals, ornamental trees.
It's kind of late to ask this question, but do you recall off the top of your head what the plan for that yard, bear with me, the northwest corner of the property? Is that just going to be a grassy
To the best of my
area?
knowledge, that's just going to be an open grassy area, but we do have Mr. Mays here representing the applicant, so he might have a better idea than myself, but that's my understanding, is it's just going to be green, open space.
So there'd certainly be the potential that the owner could put a tree or a shrub here or there to absorb some of the view.
Yeah, I just want to
Okay.
clarify for your benefit that absent some action related to the planned development district, that the landscape regulations themselves would not require the buffer being requested on the west side of the parking lot. So that would be appropriate for you to address this afternoon.
If I might ask a somewhat related question, if it's not required on the west side of the parking lot, would it be acceptable to require it to extend further down Republic to the west so that it at least partially obscures that parking without actually going down the west side of the parking? In other words, you just take the existing buffer that's proposed and extend it, another 20 or 30 feet west, so that it would provide somewhat of a side interruption. Now, a 3-foot shrub is not going to hide the cars. It might make them a little bit.
Well, that would be my concern, is that it would
Less
be a
offensive.
visual barrier that's too close to the corner. I really don't see the purpose of adding any shrubbery to the west side of the parking lot. The applicant may want to do some other things with that green space, so.
Well, I'm not saying extend it all the way to the corner. I'm saying extend it, maybe to the alignment with Highland coming from the north, the east side of Highland from the north, maybe where the crosswalk is or something like that, which would provide some coverage for that. I do think we need to decide at what point the buffering becomes, because I can see, if you look at this from the Beloit side, you might be able to say, well, we'd like a buffer along that street also. And I think we have to make a decision as to what is reasonable given the nature of this development.
And Mr. Peterson, who addressed that correspondence to the commission, is here present, and he may be able to articulate better what he's trying to achieve then.
Any other questions for staff? If not, I'll open it up to the public.
Hello, I'm Dan Peterson. I live at 948 Highland. And really, kind of the idea behind this, I drove it from from 9th Street to Santa Fe, and from Highland, from Crawford, and you really still, because of the angle of that, you really catch it pretty much. You're probably looking at 20 to 30 houses that see that from either on Republic, there's that row of houses, and I live 3 houses in on Highland and see it really well. I walk down probably 10 or 15 houses, you really still catch that. So, and Highland being such everyone's on their front porches, it's really what you see, and I think line of sight and view is important to a number of people there. And I will say this plan in general looks a lot better than what we've seen, and but yeah, just that was one thing that kind of concerned me, and I would have brought it up at the last meeting, but we didn't have a chance to speak again after we had spoken once, and we didn't know that until later on in the meeting. So that's really where the concern is, just line of sight. If there's even some sort of landscape buffer, it's better than nothing for us. So. Thank you. And I also just wanted to say I appreciated your time last week just reviewing everything in full detail, and that really was, I think, helpful for some of the people in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Dan, thank you for your
If I
time.
could just ask one question while you're up here, since it's your plan that's kind of prompted this discussion. You're speaking specifically on the west side of that parking lot, not in terms of extending that buffer down another 20 or 30 feet, because
Specifically
you
on-
still have the people that are approaching from on Republic or who live on Highland.
Right, so all the cars
The
coming
west-
down Republic
Right.
towards Santa Fe, that'll still be in, the street buffer really doesn't do a lot for most of the houses around. That's one or two houses, where this is much more for 30 houses or so that would see that.
Can I ask a devil's advocate question?
Yes.
When this was being used as a school, weren't the residents getting the same view of a parking lot?
It wasn't
Anyway,
a parking lot, it was a,
But was it used for deliveries or?
It was
No.
rarely used for
Rarely
deliveries,
used.
it's
So it's just a
predominantly for a
blank-
or basketball hoop and kind of a cement play
it
area.
is a cement play area, not a parking lot.
So which
four square
begs the
court.
question, when it was a school, where did the staff and parents park when they visited the school?
On the street.
Street.
On the street. So is that any better or worse than having a parking lot visible?
That was kind of my question is, as I sit on my front porch, I've got 3 cars across the street parked in my neighbor, so it's kind of the same thing. It's, sometimes you can't help but see cars, so yeah, I'm not sure the additional
Thank you.
buffer's necessary, but thank you, Dan.
Well, you'll get a sneer from your neighbor when you come home tonight.
Any other public comment? Okay, if not, I'll bring it back to the commission for...
One question, on the way this is worded, does the wording incorporate the amendment from the eastern half being switched to PDD R1?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
it
And
calls out
it's
the phasing.
included in here, just,
Yeah,
in the ordinance.
In section 1, it calls out phase 1 by lot and phase 2 by lot.
so just referring to the ordinance would incorporate
Right,
that
and in
amendment?
section 2, it talks about a district plan development R1 for phase 2 and a district plan development R2 for phase 1.
Okay, that's what I
So-
thought from reading, or just the way it was written on the agenda. I just wanted to make sure that
Yeah, I think
that what's
that's a,
written in the actual ordinances.
yeah, I think that's a function of the change being made between first and second reading and carrying forward
Okay,
that item.
all right. Mr. Mayor, move we approve ordinance number 20-11030 on second reading.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 20-11030 on second reading. We will have a roll call.
Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner France.
Aye.
Commissioner Hodges.
Nay.
Commissioner Ryan.
Aye.
Mayor Hoppick.
Aye. That passes 4-1. Okay, that will lead us to 7.4.
Item 7.4, downtown transferee agreements. 7.4A, resolution number 207859, authorizing the mayor to execute a transferee agreement with Salina 2020 Inc. and the Bath Pub LLC.
Okay, Mr. Scragg.
My report will pertain to both the Resolution 7859 as well as Resolution 20-7860, authorizing the mayor to execute a transferee agreement with Grassroots Efforts LLC. And they both, a lot of this background is some history that you've heard before, and I know just from past conversations you've had kind of questions about kind of the mechanics. So I tried to cover that in one fell swoop in this background report. So I'm confident by now you've heard me say multiple times that the downtown project started with a development agreement with the master developers, and then at the time that we adopted the development agreement, we identified that there'd be a supplemental agreement that also would need to be adopted, and that was subsequently adopted. So those two agreements laid the framework or the groundwork for the proposed redevelopment of the downtown in a couple of things. There were a handful of projects that were identified and known and were being provided for by way of the development agreement. And then there was additional funding identified and funds set up to be available under terms and conditions spelled out in the development agreement and the supplemental agreement for projects yet to be identified, on the assumption that application would be made and considered and it would require additional review and approval. And so the development agreement and the supplemental agreement were all drafted as if it was an agreement between the city and the master developer, Salina 2020. It conveyed rights and responsibilities on the master developer and the city. And then the reason we call these subsequent agreements that we're bringing to you transferee agreements is that it's transferring specific rights and responsibilities out of the development agreement to a third-party developer of a project. And so as a project comes along, then it's necessary to carve out responsibilities in a transferee agreement and enter into that transferee agreement. So again, I'm confident I'm telling you things you already know, but there were 4 main tools that were utilized in terms of financing: star bonds, new market tax credit financing, tax increment financing, and community improvement districts. And if you factor in the fact that there were 3 community improvement districts formed, and there were 7 different financial tools that were established as part of the development agreement and the supplemental agreement. I mentioned earlier that there were some identified initial projects. There were 9 projects by my count that were factored in at the outset when the development agreement and supplement agreements were drafted and executed. And then those agreements provided for 10 different funds to be established to segregate the income and the funds received to account for those initial projects as well as future projects. Out of that then, approximately $7 million was set aside in specified funds for what I'm calling additional projects, above and beyond what was initially anticipated and subject to future transferee agreements. And then another $2.8 million was identified or projected for downtown programming, maintenance, and security, and with the expectation that a transferee agreement would be entered into with Salina Downtown Inc. So, as kind of an overview, that is the structure that was put in place. As part of the staff report, I provided you a excerpt from the applicable portion of the development agreement or the supplemental agreement for all 10 of those funds. Some of them are project-specific: the hotel tax increment fund, the apartment tax increment fund. Others of those are more topical, and the ones that we'll be dealing with today and going forward are the new business tax increment fund. The initial projections for the project estimated about $2.6 million. When you take the anticipated revenue generation and apply the percentage allocations and develop a fund as provided by the development agreement, then the estimate would be that there'd be $2.6 million in new business tax increment funds. Then there's the downtown CID sales tax fund with multiple sub-accounts to it. So as I mentioned, $2.8 million in the maintenance, security, and programming fund, approximately $2.3 million in the new retail improvement CID fund, and $1.4 million in the existing retail improvement CID fund. And so, as you can see from the language, all of those are set up on a pay-as-you-go basis, meaning that we have to realize the revenue. The city has an obligation to set up all these funds and to then distribute the funds in the agreed-upon percentages in each one of these sub funds that are established by way of the agreement. Then, as I mentioned, the transferee agreements are where the rights and responsibilities are transferred to third-party developers. Responsibilities related to developing their project and administering their project, rights in terms of access to a portion of those funds, depending on whether they're new or existing retail and whether it's tax increment financing or CID. So then, in terms of the selection process, the agreement's spelled out There was an initial deadline set for that first round in anticipation of the alley and Old Chicago and hotel and some of the identified projects submitting applications. And then it also contemplated just on an ongoing basis completion of application forms and submission of those, and the master developer reviews those and makes a recommendation. The city representative, which is called out as the city manager, has a role in terms of receiving those and reviewing them. And then ultimately, if they meet the criteria and merit bringing forward to you as the governing body, you sign off on executing the transferee agreement. So that's where we find ourselves today. I also provided some language about out of the agreements about master developer recusal, and it provides that the master developer shall not make or participate in making any transferee agreements in which they or any of its directors, officers, or shareholders have a substantial interest. It also provides that they'll keep on file with us in report of their membership and their officers, which they've done, and it's attached in the packet. And then ultimately, if there is a circumstance that requires the master developer recusal, the agreement provides that in that instance, the agreement shall be directly between the city and the third-party developer, and the master developer is not a party to that agreement in that particular case. So with respect to the grassroots efforts project, they have provided the information. They've created a process that didn't involve anyone that had an interest, and the transferee agreement is between the city and grassroots developers without the involvement of the master developer, as all provided in the development agreement and the supplemental agreement. So with that as a background, then we have two applications for you today, or two requests for you today. The first project is called the Bath Pub at 109 South Santa Fe, and you have a copy of the full application and attachments as part of the staff report. The Bath Pub is a Bath & Body product blending bar boutique, and so as a very brief overview, and representatives of the project are here, they can certainly tell you more about it. It's a format where a client chooses their product, chooses a scent, and they can then customize the product that they're making there at the Bath Pub. And so they provide 150 scents, which can be combined with 3 scents. I haven't done the math to figure out how many permutations that is, but it sounds like a lot. And they then choose colors, and it's... I know from personal experience, my wife and others have done something similar with candles. I personally wasn't aware of this, but I think it's that kind of format, and it seems to be pretty popular these days. So their project in total is a $200,000 to $225,000 project. They have identified $98,000 worth of construction expense associated with modifying and improving the building that they'll be occupying. And they've requested $75,000 of new retail improvements from CID funds. And so the development agreement also provides that is payable annually, and it provides that a whole hierarchy of individual projects that are approved out of each fund, having priority over the other. And it very clearly spells out that there's no obligation on the part of the city unless sufficient funds are in that fund. And so that's the pay-as-you-go aspect of it. The agreement did also provide interest because this is a payout theoretically over 20 years. So in this particular case, the request for $75,000 equates to $5,732 annually over the life of the agreement, plus interest, which is by way of the agreement spelled out at a 5% rate. I'd be happy to try to answer detailed questions about the project, but I think we have representatives here that are much more knowledgeable about that. With respect to the grassroots efforts, building renovation, their intention is to acquire the storefronts from 141 to 145 South Santa Fe, which is 150 linear feet on the east side of Santa Fe, north of the Stiefel Theater. They plan to renovate the exterior facades as well as the interiors to make them have tenant finishes that are available for lease. The total project cost is estimated at $1.1 or almost $1.2 million. Their request is $296,750. Again, there's considerable expense in terms of renovation of the buildings, exterior and interior, in terms of improvements to the structural aspects of the project. On an annual basis, they would be entitled to $22,679, as I said, on a pay-as-you-go basis, assuming the funds are available, and then the interest as provided by the agreement as well. As far as a fiscal note, I'm repeating myself, but as detailed in the narrative, this is all in conformance with the provisions of the development agreement and the supplemental agreement. It is from dedicated allocations, so each percentage amount has to be distributed to the fund, the applicable fund, and then on an annual basis, city staff will have to assess the available funds compared to the, I guess you could say, liabilities or the obligations are out there, and assuming that the pay-as-you-go aspect of it is met, then the funds will be distributed. There is no obligation on the part of the city above and beyond distribution of that allocation within the fund. We don't carry with us any obligation to fund in the event that there's a shortfall. So it truly is pay-as-you-go. I've given you the numbers for both the bathtub and grassroots efforts. So the item, each one of these has been prepared as a separate transferee agreement and a resolution authorizing the mayor to execute the transferee agreements. One of those being for the bathtub, and that is Resolution 20-7859. The second one being for the grassroots efforts building renovations, and that's Resolution 20-7860. The options that we've identified for your consideration is you could approve each of those resolutions as presented. You could approve them with amendments as you deem appropriate. You can postpone consideration to a specified date and time and provide staff with additional direction regarding information or amendments that you'd like for your further consideration at a future date. Or you could vote to deny the resolutions, resulting in disapproval of the application as it's currently submitted. I certainly want to we've got representatives of the master developer, the bath pub, and grassroots efforts here, and I certainly want to acknowledge their presence and make sure that they have an opportunity to address you about each of their projects. And I will be relying on them to help answer questions, depending on what questions you might have.
Okay, before we move on, I do want to just disclose that if you looked at this, I did do title work on both of these properties, but I currently have nothing in the works with either one of these, and therefore I've talked to legal counsel to make sure that we didn't have a conflict. So, but I did want to disclose that I did do title work when both these properties were purchased.
I have a background question first, and bear with me. Is there one TIF district or 4 TIF districts?
There's 1 TIF district and 3 community improvement districts.
Okay, so the 1 TIF district, all of the incremental taxes are going to flow into that, from that district, and they're allocated between the 4 different funds according to the percentages laid out here. So theoretically, incremental taxes from the hotel, depending on how everything works, might go to the downtown business, the business TIF fund, depending on how the values change. So it's really not, the hotel TIF fund is tied only to the increment from the hotel, or the Old Chicago TIF fund is not tied to the increment from the Old Chicago. It's purely a percentage distribution.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And
I think I understand that. Now you talk about the TIF period here. When did the TIF period start and how long does it run?
Boy, it started a couple of years ago and runs for 23 years, I believe.
It runs for 23 years, and it started when?
2018, I believe.
2018, maybe? Okay. So if, for example, the Bath Pub now is asking for an allocation from the new business TIF, and I can't remember which was which, but at any rate,
they're doing the new retail CID.
They're in the CID. Okay,
Yeah.
It's the other request, the
Grassroots.
The grassroots effort that is asking for a new business TIF allocation.
Correct.
And we do that, and they're getting X number of dollars per year, capped by whatever actually comes in.
Correct.
Now, if there's a second entity that also asks for new business TIF, and they're both getting proceeds, and there aren't sufficient proceeds to cover both of those, how are the actual proceeds then allocated between the two businesses that are competing for those proceeds?
In the order of approval, they have priority, and
So in this case, the grassroots would get all of their allocation, and then if somebody comes in next week with another request, if there's enough money, then they will get theirs. If there's not, they'll get a partial. And if a third party comes in, so it's predicated by order of approval, and whoever gets here first is then more likely to be fully funded, based on the amount of revenue that is coming in.
Yeah, and there is detailed language in the development agreement about that as well. So there are some provisions about acknowledging if someone is, I guess, in arrears. But boy, I'd have to find that language back and read it to you.
Well, I guess I wanted to make sure that there was some method of doing that in a consistent fashion. So that people can understand where they stand.
I remember that discussion on the
We had
whiteboard.
that exact discussion, and that very point I wanted to make clear of. I understand the question you're asking exactly,
Right.
but that is, first in line is the best place to be.
First in line gets the money.
Yeah, and the second in line doesn't get any money until the
it's
first in
available
line
after the first in line is made whole.
Right.
Okay.
And then I believe if it turns out that there's additional funds at some point in the future, then those that fell short have an opportunity to try to catch back up. But it's still in priority order. And the other clarification I would offer is tax increment fund is a new increment to be generated. The CID fund is a 1% sales tax imposed in the downtown CID district that is revenue. It's not increment, it's dedicated revenue for those funds.
Okay, now back to basic question about the TIF. When you say it's the increment, are we talking about the increment resulting from a new improvement, or if I have an existing business and my tax goes up because my valuation went up or the mill levy went up, is that increment also captured by the fund, or is it just the part attributable to the new improvement?
Yeah, it's increment in the growth over the base year when it was established.
Changes in base valuation, changes in mill levy would result in growth in the tax increment fund also.
Correct.
It's not just tied to the improvements.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions of staff? Do we have any comments from the public? Would anybody from Grassroots or anyone like to?
Guy Walker, 500 Graves Boulevard. Speaking on behalf of Salina 2020, we were involved in kind of reviewing the application from the Bath Pub. And one point of clarification I wanted to make in the staff report was that the project was estimated to be $200,000 to $225,000, and actually that does not include the cost of the building. The cost of the building is another $225,000, I think, so it's another $200,000. So I think the total cost of the project is closer to $420,000, which dramatically lowers the percentage of incentive. So I just wanted to make that clear. I think it takes the incentive down to about 17% instead of a third. So that's something we've been really cognizant of as we've kind of evaluated these as they've come forward, is to try and keep that percentage down. And make sure that it's not, not getting over a certain percentage. So I just wanted to clarify that. And then also just wanted to say that when we did kind of hear out the Bath Pub, we were spoiled. We got kind of samples and scents, and so we got to really understand exactly what it was. But it sounds like a really neat business, and something that is exactly when you look at the goals and objectives that were set forth when we did the development agreement 3 years ago or however long ago that was. This is exactly what everybody hoped would happen, was a local person buying a building, fixing it up, and opening a new business. So we felt very strongly that it was a great use of the incentives. So I just want to make that clear and make sure I shared that with everybody. So, and I think on the TIF, I don't want to I think Mike's searching for the development agreement, but I think it's 20 years. I think it's the CID that's 22.
Oh, okay.
I'm not
Yeah.
certain of that, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. So I just wanted to make that
I
clear.
just know with the Coles TIF, for example, it was tied to the repayment period on the bonds. Of course, that was a very different sort
Because
of
there was
beast.
debt involved,
Yeah,
right? Yeah, sure, okay.
And another thing that Mr. Walker's comments remind me of, as the city representative looking at the applications, one thing that I try to be mindful of is the actual investment in physical improvements. I mean, regardless of the business, those are going to remain in the downtown and across the board. I think the requests we get for funding are less than just the construction costs associated with the improvements to buildings, which will remain regardless. And the 23 years is statutorily what is allowed, but you may be right. We may
And I
set
could
it
be
up
wrong, you
for
might be
20.
right. I'm not certain of that, but.
And I'm not sure, maybe one of you has this answer. Do we know what the balance is in the new retail CID proceeds and what we have in the new business TIF funds? Do we know what those balances are currently?
I apologize, but I do not.
Okay, I was just curious if...
I do not know that either. I think it started, I want to say that started, the CID collection started like in late 2019. So there should, I mean, theoretically, there should be a balance in there, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah, I know that, we had the initial payment to the master developer, and the last I knew, we hadn't reached that yet. So that's the first threshold to be met, but I don't know the dollar amount at the moment. I did find the language about the public finance proceeds priority system, and within each fund, the proceeds shall be made available to reimburse the third-party developers based upon each party's position within a priority system. Each party's position is determined by the date of completion of their transferee project, as evidenced by an issuance of a certificate of completion. During each disbursement period, third parties shall have access to proceeds up to the respective annual allotment based on their position in the priority system. Each party shall be reimbursed the entirety of its proceeds immediately following within the priority system. Each party shall be reimbursed the entirety of its public finance proceeds annual allotment before the next developer immediately following within the priority system. Once a developer is reimbursed for eligible costs in an amount equal to its proceeds cap, they vacate their position in the priority system, and the next developer immediately following moves up into the vacated position. In the event of a shortfall, the developer is not reimbursed the entire amount in any disbursement period. The difference between the allotment and the amount of proceeds actually reimbursed shall be an annual public finance proceeds shortfall. A third-party developer's total shortfall shall equal its annual proceeds shortfall from the most recent disbursement period, and if any subsequent disbursement period following the accrual of a shortfall, there are funds deposited into the fund in which such shortfall occurs in excess of the amount required to reimburse, then such excess shall be utilized to pay down public finance proceeds shortfalls based on the priority system. And I had to read that to you because it is that complicated. But they all are in priority order based on their completion. They then get access to their full amount, if that's available, and it moves to the next priority. In the event that there is anybody or more than one has a shortfall, that doesn't get addressed unless in subsequent years there's a surplus in that fund, and then you try to go back and address any existing shortfalls with the surplus realized at a later date.
Any other questions?
Glad I don't have to keep track of all that.
What's that?
Glad I don't have to keep track of all that, right?
The thought, I guess, behind that at the time, I know, was just general conversations about the people that were the very first to come in and do this were taking the most risk, as opposed to people who do it after it's all kind of working well and things like that. So that was the sort of thought process behind a priority system. And there had to be some mechanism, obviously, to do it as well, so.
And I am repeating myself, and to build a pay-as-you-go approach so that there wasn't any, immediate obligation if there was a shortfall.
Okay. Any other questions? Is there anyone else from the public that would like to comment? Okay, if not, I will bring it back to the commission for action.
I move we approve resolution number 20-7859, authorizing the mayor to execute a transferee agreement with Salina 2020 Inc. and the Bath Pub LLC.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 20-7859. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That passes 5-0.
And, Mr. Mayor, move adoption of resolution number 20-7860, authorizing the mayor to execute a transferee agreement with Grassroots Efforts LLC.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 20-7860. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That also passes 5-0. So wish all the applicants good luck. It's exciting to see all that's going on downtown. So thank you. Okay, that will lead us to 7.5.
Item 7.5, soccer programming presentation and possible implementation of the soccer program.
Hey, Mr. Shealy.
Good afternoon, Commission. My name is Travis Shaley. I'm the Recreation Superintendent here for the Salina Parks and Recreation. And as you recall, on June 15th and July 6th, there was some public comment made towards soccer to get soccer going for the remainder of 2020, very similar to the baseball and softball. So we went back to the drawing board and started preparing a possible plan for you, and that's what we're doing today, is to present that. We started the drawing board, very similar approach we had with baseball and softball, a volunteer approach. And then going into the weeds, we kind of discovered some differences. And the first one was there's really no local organization to take over the program or the league like we had with baseball and softball. If you recall that IFA really stepped up to the plate to help run our baseball and softball league, which resulted in 72 league teams and 307 tournament teams we had this summer. So, but we quickly discovered we do not have that local organization to run. So we're here to recommend to you that we kind of operate as normal, whatever normal is, but as normal as we send out the registrations. We do utilize our current recreation supervisor. We collect the revenues, and then, but there are some differences to reduce those costs. And I'll cover those here later on. But I wanted to mention that one of those was we identified an outside funding to help reimburse the official's expense. So there are some part-time expenses with this recommendations, but this would be that would be reimbursed on the back end before 2020 ends. So moving forward, before I hand the mic over to Dave Atterkirk, I just wanted to explain a few things, and he's going to handle some of the participation. And with these are the players right here, and in the green, myself, my first full season here as athletic supervisor, I oversaw the baseball, softball, basketball, volleyball, you name it. And during that time, that was my first full year, was the 2007. And if you recall, that was their first full year of the soccer complex when it started. So that's why we started with 2007. And then you can kind of see the evolution, and then the transition. And then right in 2017, and ironically enough, this is when Dave Atterkirk was in charge of the Salina Soccer Club. And then here in 2017 is when we hired Dave Adderkirk as recreation supervisor. And then he'll take over the podium from here, but I just kind of want to explain that a little bit, and that he can go through the growth of recreation soccer from there. Okay, that right there, and then there's your green button.
With the pointer?
Dave, you may plan on covering it, but I think you probably need to talk a little bit about the rise and fall of the soccer club.
Right. I mean, that's kind of where I'm going to go with this first slide. This really just tries to give a picture of the transition that happened in Salina. You know, the original group of people that started the club, you know, I was fairly early in on that. And that group was the group that also helped raise a lot of the funds for the soccer complex itself, because it was a private partnership with the city and private funding. The difference in here in this transition was, I mean, to me, this slide points out kind of the importance of what's happened within the club. The club was at its peak when it was run by a bunch of volunteer groups, and so it was, I think, the cheaper option out there, because we did it with a lot of different parent coaches. We had set up a scholarship fund to help fund the kids in the program, and we'd also set up a coach mentoring program so that we could pay the coaches without having that be a burden on the family. But as things rolled through later on in here, the league, after some of us in the original program stepped away from running I wasn't the president anymore. Lori Reed stepped away. Just some different people stepped away. And so it started to, I think, have some struggles in there. So it was about 2014 or 2013-14 that the league actually stopped going here. So that's where you see a pickup then of where the Parks and Rec starts to pick up numbers. Then obviously where they hire me in here, what we did was just kind of change the focus of the way it was. We got the joint partnership with the club that's in here now, and we focused on friends play with friends, and we also with the club being a more expensive travel portion, the Parks and Rec program became kind of the option for the easy entry and the less expensive way to get started. So that's where we've really seen the numbers increase in just what we've done in trying to run the league in more of we can bring in surrounding communities. The last 2 seasons that we had, we did have 5 teams from out of town come into. We had a team from Hayes, we had a couple from Manhattan, and we've had a couple from Great Bend that are participating here also. So we're starting to see, just from the fact that we're also able to play all year, we're starting to see the fact that it's bringing back in some of the outside communities that we used to have. The league, when it first ran, when we were in kind of our heydays back in here, we had McPherson, Hayes, Great Bend. We had all of the surrounding communities, Manhattan, Junction City, just about all of them were bringing teams over here to play league. We were starting to see that benefit come back again with the teams from Manhattan and Hayes. In fact, I think I saw an email that I got tagged in on that one of the parents from Hayes actually wrote just a question and kind of saying that they really wanted to sponsor and support the fact that the league here in Salina was something that was very beneficial for them, so they didn't have to either travel to Wichita or Kansas City, which are both far more expensive options as far as league goes. So that is something that, is a benefit for us running a program here too. The next slide just really shows the kind of the decline and then what we were able to do here in the last 2 or 3 years as far as stemming the tide of players and increasing and starting to see a really nice increase. Some of this is just the fact that, we're a good option as far as the expense side of it. Some of it is the fact that we changed the way it's organized, in that I went away from a tryout system and went totally by school. So it's a friends play with friends approach. And we have a lot of kids and some of the players that are here that they play in the club and they play on the travel approach, but they're also playing with their friends here in the Parks and Rec program. So it's been something that's been very beneficial for them from that standpoint too. Is yeah, you get to go travel and you get to go play with a certain group of friends, but that's a different format than you have some friend that you see in school all the time, but they're not really dedicated, or maybe they have another sport that's their main sport, but they want to play Parks and Rec soccer. So it's a chance for those two kids to play together, both on the girls and the guys' side. So we were able to make some headway. Like I say, we stopped the downcline or the decline, and we started to see some increase in numbers again here in just the last year.
Mr. Outerkirk, are those are unique participants?
Right.
Okay, so if a child
this slide
participates,
just combines the two,
Right. So
Parks and Rec and.
a player participates in Parks and Rec and also participates in club, they're not counted twice.
Right. No.
Gotcha.
All right, so this is more a look at the teams. And for this slide, what I really wanted to kind of show was then the transition between what the Fieldhouse was able to do for us and also adding other programs in there. So you can kind of see, if you look over here at the left, that basically gives you the rundown from spring, summer, 3v3, and then fall, and then when the bottom two are when we go into the Fieldhouse and do winter programming too. So you pretty much have an ability to play all year round now. The last two columns, the reason that we're seeing such a big increase in the total number of teams, and this is not necessarily unique individuals in this one, this is just teams total for all the programs. We did see some fatigue in families in that once we got the ability to play all the way through fall, into winter, play back into spring again, and then summer, after a year and a half or so of that cycle, some of the families realized, well, we're not going to necessarily play in every single program because, we want to break from them just a little bit too. But what you can see in these numbers over here is that because we gave families the ability to play in an inexpensive way all year round with the Fieldhouse and with the different programming that we did, we saw a huge increase in just the overall numbers of participation that's going. So there's a demand there for the fact that, and we can get back to bigger numbers. I think right now we're in that 350 or so number range as far as total players. We had 500 or more at one point in time. So, there's a demand there on that side of it. And then my last one is just a breakdown of the difference between the seasons. This is the fall and spring, just Parks and Rec only program. So it's the individual teams. And I guess the thing to point out on this one is on these last couple columns, that's where we started to see some of the teams from out of town come in. We were in that 12 or so number, but we saw the increase in those last two bars from the teams from out of town being able to participate, and seeing this as a lot of them will even plug it in as a secondary option. They may go travel and play in Wichita, but they like to pick up some games here closer by. And the thing that we're also trying to do with this is be accommodating again. One of the things that we did really good in the past was if you had siblings on two different teams in Hayes, you didn't want to bring those families in 2 different days. So we tried to make it so that whatever day that we bring them in, they're going to get to play all their games. So just do things that show that we're accommodating and we want those people to come here again. Along with that, we had the tournament that we ran last fall too. And so that's something that it was a natural stepping stone for these programs that we could promote right within the Parks and Rec and the different club teams that we have to stay right here and participate. And that's one of the reasons early on in the club we saw the big jump in numbers. A lot of those teams weren't teams that wanted to go travel every single weekend. They were teams that, because there was a facility right here and it was an inexpensive and good option to play, they played right here. That's it from my side of it.
So, Dave, if you could go back to that first bar graph that you had, and not to belabor the point, but as Mr. Outerkirk was saying, we kind of had the heyday there, and at that time, all the games were home games. We didn't travel.
Exactly.
Everybody traveled to Salina, and that was right after the complex was built. And then it kind of transitioned to, a split home and away. And then as the soccer club had their leadership kind of move on, and I assume as their kids grew out of the age group, we had an agreement that was a use agreement with the Salina Soccer Club that they worked really hard to try to figure out a transition plan, and they ultimately assigned that agreement to a club out of Manhattan. And there was quite a bit of conversation about what that might look like and assurances about what that format might be. And that went on for a year or two, probably.
About a year and a half, right in there somewhere.
And
yeah.
between fees and format and travel and what have you, that really just didn't work out. And so that, in my estimation, then created the void that we've been trying to fill.
Well, and so another thing within that context, where they were still here when we still see a jump in the Parks and Rec. Well, that was because when that club came in, they were not interested in coaching female teams either. They pretty much kept all of the boys teams, but what we did see, either girls come over within the Parks and Rec program, or I know of lots of girls that played on a McPherson team and had to travel because that group just wasn't interested in doing that side of it for whatever reason. So we're also taking a much more holistic approach of we want both sides. I mean, the schools both have programs, both boys and girls, so we're trying to feed the system as much as possible on both sides of the equation.
So I guess part of the point is the city made a deliberate an intentional effort to try to recover from what occurred in that cycle. And so we reached out to the club that we're affiliated with now and tried to come up with a more workable arrangement, and we've committed Dave to the effort, and we're making progress. We're not where we were, but both from a programming, youth sports perspective, as well as making use of the facility, we're trying to get back to numbers close to our heyday.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
There we go. And then similar to baseball and softball, I know Mike and I sat down and had some grueling conversations over what the city would be responsible for, what the volunteer group would be responsible for. So I took that same format and used that for the soccer. And as the first one says, the mowing, we did that for baseball and softball. We just didn't have to mow it once. So you gotta mow that twice a week in order for it to be the conditions to be playable. So we do recommend that for the complex as well. The initial field lining, we do have equipment and that knowledge. It takes a little skill to lay out the first field, and we want to make it a good wide white line, and that does take some time. It really does. So we do have that knowledge to lay out how many fields, what size of fields, what they all include. So we recommend that we do that duty initially. Again, the registration, the background checks, the game scheduling, all that stuff that we do normally, we would recommend in this case as well. However, the one exception to that would be on the backside, we would get reimbursed by the Mid-Kansas United Soccer Initiative, okay? So at the year end this year, we would know how much we paid for soccer officials, and then they would reimburse us with a check. And that amount is approximately about $3,000 for outdoor and our indoor futsal program. This is not anything new to us. We have Dave, we call him Soccer Dave, by the way, that he opens, closes, and he's on site for those league games. That's nothing new. The lights, again, we do have lights out at the Salina Soccer Complex. Similar to baseball and softball, we're responsible for turning on and off the lights. Spraying weeds, as you notice, they've been growing. So spraying the weeds would be our responsibility. The irrigation, we do have irrigation out there. We can program it depending on the rain, so we can keep doing those responsibilities as well. The repairing of fields and facility, we do this mid-season. The goalie boxes do tend to wear out there, so we do have to rotate those fields, and then towards the end of the season, we do some sodding, we do some seeding work. We would assume those responsibilities as well. Moving to the volunteers, and there's multiple volunteers that's already reached out to Dave, and they have committed to doing some of these duties. Trash. We did the same thing with baseball and softball. That's pre, during, and post. Games and practices, picking up after the trash in the parking lots, bleacher areas, those type of things, and that does transition to the restrooms as well. Subsequent field linings, again, once we lay that base, that good lining, then typically it takes us in a normal year to reline at least every week or every other week, and that depends on the weather. If it rains a lot, the grass is going to grow. The grass is going to grow, we're mowing. So that's a little depending on weather right there, but I would say at least every other week. And we do have a spray that we can check out to that volunteer group, and it works really well. Clearing the goals, this has already occurred, that, for practices during games and after the season, putting them back in our storage facility, they have committed to help setting the goals as well. Weed eating and edging, as we are developing through this, of having those specific people sign that volunteer form to cover the city liability-wise, but we do have some individuals that said they would do that. And then the reimbursement of officials right there, again, we have, and I think I have this included, an official letter, there it is, stating that they will reimburse the city of Salina before January 1 of 2021. Moving to some financials, and bear with me on this, that's why I got the pointer, okay? But I tried to do this with expenses on the left-hand side and then revenues on the right-hand side. So we did the direct program expenses right here, and I pulled everything from 2019, and those are actuals right there. And then there's a column that under this proposed volunteer approach, what those estimated expenses would be. And I know here in the last couple months, there's been some talk about indirect costs and those type of things. So I did want to include those as well pertaining to the facility. And so I included those. And if you notice one right there, 6,248. I wanted to explain that because under a normal year, we have a part-time personnel mowing. Well, without part-time personnel, we're dedicating one full-time staff member to do that duty, and the approximate cost for that is listed there. So you have your direct program expenses right here, $3,431, with indirect costs of $6,248, which comes out to $9,679 for this outdoor program. Okay. Then moving to the right-hand side, oops, I got ahead of myself. Then you have your revenues over here. Again, direct program revenues. This is what we took in last year. Here's what we think we'll be able to pull in this year. And I used a percentage with that. We had a little bit of knowledge of overall with baseball and softball tournaments, league, it was kind of factored into a 75% of what we normally have. So I took our these actuals and utilized that 75% to come up with those projected revenues. And again, we do have outdoor tournament and then with some rentals in those indirect facility revenues, so I included those. So with the outdoor program itself, total cost would be $9,679. Moving forward, outdoor ends usually up at that late October, early November. And again, we transition on a normal year right into futsal. If you're not and I was, I need a little explanation with that futsal word as well a couple years ago, but it's basically indoor soccer without the walls. And they utilize the basketball court as their court, and it's fast. And it's a weighted ball, keeps the ball down, but it's moving. You know, that game is moving. So the last 2 years, that program has flourished, you know, especially with the field house online. The numbers have increased dramatically in that program. I took the same approach with the futsal expenses on the left-hand side, and then the revenues on the right-hand side. The proposed volunteer expenses, especially within this program, are very, very little. Now, on the indirect expenses, I utilize what we would charge a user group for rent for that space to cover some of those indirect costs of heating, lighting, those type of things. So the indirect costs for the futsal program is estimated at $5,940. When you total them up, it comes to $6,140. The total expenses for these two programs combined would be $15,819. There we go. Some other miscellaneous factors to consider. Again, we don't have the economic impact as far as baseball and softball goes, but we do have some, and then we do have the USSSA tournament, which have already requested to host their tournament yet this fall, by the way. So they're waiting. And we do have additional tournaments. The Mid-Kansas tournament, it was huge up until 2017. And then we're attempting to get that tournament back online. Other facility users, we do have Puma, which is our local club. In contract, we do still have a contract in place with them to provide a facility until 2022. Salina Central, Salina South, Kansas Westland, they also utilize the complex as well. And something we didn't have for you on the front side of the baseball and softball, but we're lucky enough to have it here, is the KSYSA, they already have their COVID guidelines in place. So I did list that website there for you. So all the Kansas State teams that are playing this fall are following those guidelines right there. So I gave you that website. So our recommendation is to utilize the proposed presentation or to a modified volunteer support approach for the practices and league games and tournaments this fall and early winter. Our recommendation also includes maintaining existing recreation staffing levels to help maintain the parks facilities, and while adding a field maintenance staff member to the soccer complex to relieve one of the parks members, because remember, we're adding a mowing. So we're recommending to dedicate a field maintenance staff member since baseball and softball season. Now, we do probably have a few rentals, that type of thing this fall, but virtually the baseball softball season is finished. So dedicating one of those staff members for that second mowing, we do recommend. We do recommend returning the recreation supervisor who is currently on a work share back to full-time. We do recommend to provide the facilities as such for the outdoor and the indoor programming. We also, our last recommendation is to authorize an approximate additional expense of $15,819. With that, I'll give it back to Commission.
I just have two questions, and I'm not sure I know the answer. I think and we talk about field maintenance staff and park staff. Could you explain just basically why what sounds like folks from the same department are divided in those two groups?
Yes, there is a recreation division and then a parks division. And right now, we have 5 recreation staff members who were helping coordinate, facilitate, and field maintenance for the baseball and softball. So we have 5 of those, and 3 of those were more or less your supervisors, because we had a lot of evenings, a lot of weekends, bathrooms, just you name it, to cover. With the decline of baseball and softball, and those current staff members are doing 2 pages full of field maintenance duties to catch up on. But we feel we can dedicate one of those to help the parks, because they are doing the mowing at the complex right now. So we can transition or dedicate one of those to help the parks out, and in return, parks can maybe address some of the other areas in the city.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, we're increasing the mowing and maintenance frequency, so we're trying to account for that.
Yes, we are increasing the frequency of the mowing from once to twice a week at least, to keep a playable surface. And we did that for baseball and softball, because mowing, especially the rain that we had, keeping up on the mowing is quite a challenge. And to have, especially for soccer, to keep that playable surface safe and ideal for soccer, it needs to be mowed twice a week. And it's at 4.5, 5 inches right now. We need it down to 2.5 to ideally to play.
In addition to safety, it allows the ball to travel so that the game plays at the pace that it needs to play at.
Correct.
So if you wanted to beat a fast team, you just go.
If you practice on tall grass at home, you may not show so well in your weight.
Right. And I think we see so many construction contracts come through here with a contingency. This is an awfully tight budget. If you go over budget, where does the extra money come from? Because if this is real tight, I'd rather squeeze out the extra dollars ahead of time.
Well, I'll try to field that one. This is kind of our best estimate, but recognizing any payroll expense is kind of addressed as we make the commitment, we staff it, we schedule it, and then at year end we may be off some, and it just comes out of in this case, the department's budget, and then ultimately out of the general fund. Okay. But we don't typically have contingency for base payroll or overtime. We budget it and then try to manage to it the best we can.
So we'd be in this to completion, and if the dollars are a little off, we just handle it at the
correct
end. Okay.
I guess my question/comment would be, every week we get emails, we have people come to Citizens Forum. I know that we all, in our personal lives, run into people who express concern about the state of the parks. And I guess my question here is, at what point could we relieve the park personnel of their duties to the soccer complex and go specifically with the recreation side of the equation with the staff that's working out at the ball fields at this point?
I'm going to put Ms. Pack on the spot a little bit. We had a conversation this morning. It's really a broader answer to that is, because we have not brought any of the part-time staff on, because regardless of division, we've got staff across the board at 32-hour weeks and some of them at 24-hour weeks. The first step would be bringing staff back to a full schedule, and that creates some capacity. Having said that, we're trying to balance the prior direction the governing body's given about, budget projections and not touching reserves and addressing the projected shortfall with staffing. So I don't know if Ms. Pack can speak to how much it can quantify the hours of work share. That may not be a fair question. We just had that passing conversation this morning.
No, I figured it and I sent it to you. What I looked at is, the question has always been parks. So I looked at, if we brought all park staff back, and I looked at August 10th, which is a week from now, we would gain 320 hours a week, we would lose, I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head because I didn't bring it, but you do have an email.
Okay. Well, I can see if I
I
can
believe
find
the
it.
number was about $106,000 in savings is what we would lose from what our estimates were through the end of the year.
Now, that's not a direct answer to your question, because that's parks wide. The difficulty becomes, if you say this is a priority, we're trying to minimize the financial impact. That presumes that all of our other activities, mowing and maintenance, stays the same, and we're just trying to backfill this. Next week, when we come to you with a financial study session, we'll probably be in a better position not only to talk parks, but public works and our other functions in terms of how's our actual experience compared to our projections, and what's our receptivity to taking another look at the work share approach. But this, we started down that path, then you were approached by the chamber and baseball about their particular interest, and you indicated some receptivity to that. And then we were approached by soccer, you indicated some receptivity to that. And now, chronologically, mowing and maintenance citywide appointed conversation, and we're staffing that through as well.
Thank you. And I guess my other question/comment would be on page 9, the fact that our seasonal mowing costs are basically double because we've opted to have full-time staff complete those tasks as opposed to doing our usual seasonal. And I know that we've made our commitment for this year, and if this year is a one-year aberration, I think it is important to keep our full-time staff whole. However, if we're having the same conversation next year, I think that we should maybe keep in mind that it's an expensive way to get turf mowed or trimmed or treated for weeds or whatever.
Yeah, hopefully we won't find ourselves this year. I would agree with that. But what this ultimately did is lowered our total payroll and forced us to concentrate our full-time staff on what was our highest priority. I mean, the alternative would have been all of our full-time staff continues to fulfill their responsibilities,
I
and
right.
then we have to bring on more part-time staff.
Right,
So
right.
it
I
was-
understand. I mean, I understand. I participated in those conversations. I understand that. And then I guess my final question is there an overall plan for bringing back the other programming? Because obviously we have dedicated soccer families, coaches that have brought us this. We had the baseball and softball people that also volunteered. But I'm thinking specifically like our special populations, our seniors, senior activities. And so I guess my question is, at what point, those are very deserving programs over, and at what point do we start to talk about bringing some of those back as COVID restrictions allow us to do so?
Well, our senior programmer and our special populations programmer have both retired. So we're going to have to fill those positions before we can move forward. But at a certain point, 2021, as soon as we can get those staff positions filled, our goal is to bring those back.
Resume that
But as of
programming?
right now, the senior programmer position is vacant, and the special populations just gave her resignation last week. So,
And I think there's probably two ways to approach that. One, we made the overarching decision about our programming, and now we're program by program revisiting that. That's one way to approach it. Or if by way of our financial conversations we say that we can take our foot off the brake and more broadly make some staffing decisions, then we can tackle it that way.
Thank you.
One of the other things I wanted to touch on was that Travis had talked about 5 full-time staff members that work in the recreation department. Only 2 of those staff members actually run maintenance equipment at the fields. So we have 2 full-time staff members that do maintenance on those 3 sports complexes, so 2 full-time people handling 271 acres a week. So I just want to make that clear that Travis doesn't have 5 maintenance people that can do this. He has 2. And we're going to commit one of those to the additional mowings. But I just want to be clear, he doesn't have 5 people that can run equipment.
This slide says there's an additional expense of $15,819, and that ties back to the amount on page 10. Against with, as I understand it, there's an offset of $10,000 in revenues. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe that is correct.
Yes, Commissioner Franz, we do propose there would be $10,840 based on that, our estimated teams or participants based on that 75%.
I get it's kind of a guesstimate at this point.
Sure. But with that, we do estimate an overall cost recovery of 69% with all the indirect costs that we listed out.
Now, where I'm going with this is back to page 12. You've got a list of things we have to do. Are those things included in that $15,000 cost, or are those in addition to the $15,000 cost?
Okay, the $15,000 would be the direct and indirect expenses that we know of that it would take to run outdoor and indoor.
But does that include existing recreation staffing levels and adding a field maintenance staff member and those things?
It does not.
Okay, so those are in addition to that expense. I would like to echo in some way Commissioner Hodges' concerns. I am concerned about firing up programs and not addressing our general parks issue. We need to keep those in playable condition too. And obviously we have not, and I know people work very hard to do as well as we have. You know, I will be blunt, I'm not going to support adding programming if we can't at the same time bring people back to take care of our basic park systems. Those two things in my mind have to happen together. You know, we made an exception with baseball, and I was troubled by that for the same reasons. So I think that those two things have to run together, and I think any action we take today on soccer needs to carry with it a caveat that we will also commit to bringing back, I don't know, X number of people to try to catch our park conditions up to speed. And I'm not being critical of the park department. They've done the best they can with what they have, but I think we need to give them what they need in order to bring us back up to speed.
And I understand your point, and this understandably has been an evolution on your part as the governing body in terms of the direction that you've given us and continue to give us. So I think we'll be better prepared to have that conversation next Monday when we bring you a financial study session. But up to this point, my takeaway has been that we started very fiscally conservatively with a directive, and then we've incrementally backed away from that directive, and that you've asked staff at each one of those increments to quantify for you what that impact on our estimated revised budget would be. I don't have a number for you. If the I can't quantify that caveat today.
Then can we delay this decision until next week when we know that?
From a timing standpoint,
I mean, we're already kind of against not to say that you can't. You can obviously do anything that you want, but I just know that the Y has already completed their registration. They're going to be starting league here pretty quick. I mean, so for us, soccer season starts, this is just kind of the calendar run of it right here. So we need to be rolling by September 1st, preferably, to kind of fall within the fall season period. And you've got 2 weeks worth of registration, shirts to order. You just got things that will need to happen. So that's, I guess, my feedback on that.
Yeah, and I think, I'll only speak for myself. I think there'd be enough pressure on us to try to increase park staffing with or without this. Because we need to see the numbers, but I can see where time is going to be an issue. Because it'll be September in 3 weeks.
Yeah, I just wanted to
4 weeks.
echo Dave's comment. We're usually, a registration deadline is here this week or next week in a normal year, in order to get the practices in, get those team practices, get the teams formed, order shirts, equipment, and get games going by early September. Right now is when we normally do that.
Any other questions? Mr. or Commissioner Franz? Commissioner Ryan?
Just the opinion that I think it's acceptable to move this program forward and be optimistic that when we get a chance to review the budget numbers, we're going to be inclined to want to take on more of the mowing and aesthetic responsibilities we have in the past. So I'm confident it's all going to work out.
I do have a few questions, and I'm not sure who answers this. How many teams are we expecting to have in the fall in these programs? Just in the fall program, not the winter one.
Fall soccer?
Yes.
So, I mean, last fall, we had around 150 players, which would have included a couple teams from out of town. So we'll probably be somewhere in the 120, because we individually register.
How many how many local teams would we have?
Probably 12. If we had a full run at it, I mean, I'm hoping to get close to that anyway.
And are games played during the week, on weekends? When are the league games played?
Well, traditionally, which we're talking about changing, I've run on a Thursday night to give the kids a chance to play underneath the lights. That was just kind of a new thing. And then we did Saturday on fall with football. We did Saturday mornings so that K-State football and KU football wasn't interrupted. So we took that into account. So yeah, I mean, we would do Saturday mornings, and I wouldn't necessarily anticipate doing Thursday nights just for the expense side of it. I don't want to turn the lights on necessarily.
And because I'm not familiar, how many fields are north of the parking lot, and how many fields are south of the parking lot?
5 on the main development, which is on the north side of the parking lot, and 2 on the south side of the parking lot. 2 brand new big pads. Now, those can all be subdivided. When I say 5, there's 5 big full pads. For almost all soccer, especially fall parks and rec, we subdivide those into multiple fields. So a U12 field is basically half of a full-size pad. A U10 field is like a third of a full-size pad. So you can get almost 3 U10 fields on a full-size pad, 2 U12 fields, then you go to the full-size.
So I guess what I was getting at is we're talking about mowing twice a week, and it would appear to me that you wouldn't have to use the north fields, and you could not have to mow those.
The difficulty we have right now are the 2 fields, and somebody else maybe can address this in addition, is that the 2 fields that are the brand new fields over on the south side, we wore them out a little bit, so we've actually moved the goals over to the north side. We wouldn't have to use the south side. We get 2 high school teams that practice out there, so depending on how many teams we get, we might only need 1 more pad, technically, to fulfill what we need to do with Parks
I guess
and Rec.
what I'm doing is trying to balance whether we had to use, as we talk about the number of acres out there, obviously time is money because of the amount of mowing. I'm thinking there's a way not to have to mow both.
Right,
all
and that is
facility,
something that we've discussed, is the idea.
And that would help
right.
with the parks too. So I think part of our job is to compromise, and I think you've heard that up here, and that's what I was kind of looking at. Is there a way to compromise to not have to mow all those fields twice a week?
And I think that's definitely something that we've discussed, where we were just going to mow the necessary pads versus starting to mow the whole complex again, right?
Okay. Couple other questions I was going through here. The indoor futsal that's being used, that's using the field house. Are we opening the field house up for basketball, volleyball also? The rec programs this winter?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but until 2021, with the part-time people reduced or eliminated, we are anticipating going with that with 2021, January 20, but we have not been given any indication of.
That was what I was thinking. So I guess my question is, does does it seem feasible to allow futsal to happen indoors at the field house and not basketball and volleyball?
You might speak to, I mean, we did identify a threshold for tournaments and a number of teams, and then you might also speak to the efforts to have leagues at the school. I don't think it was successful, but there was some. The basketball league was looking to.
Yes. In the past, we've had our basketball teams have practiced and still have, even with the field house, have practice at the USD facilities. We could look into that as well.
I mean, I think that's something we need to talk about, because as we talk about your indirect cost, you have $6,000 for heating. Well, if we didn't have futsal in there, would that bill be considerably lower because we wouldn't put on the heat? Or if we're going to heat the building, should we be doing other facilities? Again, I think those are things we're going to have to, as a commission, at some point address, because it seems like we're.
Well, it sounds like it has to be today.
And that's frustrating, because I think that everybody's kind of expressed some, it would be nice to have an overall, vision or a plan for re-implementing programming. And I don't want to punish soccer because we've already let baseball happen, but then I don't want to punish basketball because we've let soccer and baseball happen, or whatever. And not having like kind of a master plan in terms of, staffing back up to parks. I'm just, I don't know.
If this helps.
I had trouble with the baseball, softball thing too.
We do sort of have a master plan, which is take deliberate steps. I mean, we're incrementally moving forward. I mean, I think this is the only time-sensitive issue between now and next week. But I agree, if the field house is going to be open, I even wrote down a question, who else would it be easy to let in? But I don't think we are under the time crunch for that as we are for soccer.
One of the things that we originally discussed when we started talking about phasing things back in is we did say that we would bring programs to you as they started to phase in. We have the staff that can start basketball back up. We have the staff that can start volleyball up. It's just not their seasons. So as you talk about a plan to rephase, as these programs start to come back online and registration would normally take place, then at whatever level, we'll be back at some point in time to discuss those as well. It's just this is the soccer season.
And not to be argumentative, but I would tell you your master plan is the 2020 revised budget that we prepared that was drastic, and it cut all programming. It cut part-time staff. It cut all Parks and Rec programming, and the only conversations we've had until this point have not been a master revisiting of all of that programming. It has been an individual request from the podium that you, as the governing body, then said, staff, please see if you can address their concern. And these are the two concerns that have come to you that you've then directed staff to staff through.
Yeah. And I know there's a quality of life that we owe our citizens, but I know baseball, softball, part of their draw for us to look at that was the economic impact to restaurants, hotels, other things, because of the number of tournaments they would bring in, which I believe they did a significant number of those by driving by facilities. So again,
that is correct. That was
one of them.
When we brought baseball and softball to you, we were hearing from the hoteliers and we were hearing from the Chamber of Commerce the economic aspects of it. And then the other unique factor was how much the organization stepped up to facilitate. So that was your conversation at that point. When the soccer conversation came up, we did have a conversation, or we did point out the differences between baseball and soccer in terms of tournaments and heads in beds and economic impact, but the conversation transitioned from that to wanting to it being an important activity and you wanting to find a way to make it happen.
Tell me, if at the study session next week we talk about this, our updated financial condition and so on, would we be prepared to make a decision during the regular meeting to bring park staff back to try to deal with the quality of life issues involved with having weeds neck high in some of the parks. I mean, I am concerned that we step forward and address those if we're going to do this and start talking about other programming. We also need to start talking about those issues. And I think we need to move forward with that at least an equal priority with this.
Understood. That would be my intention.
I guess the question is, can we tolerate a week delay on the soccer issue?
Doesn't sound like it.
I think what we've forgotten is most of the mowing and the maintenance that we're doing in parks is by part-time staff. By bringing our full-time staff back to do programming, they're not going to be available to do mowing. Or you're going to say, bring back full-time staff, and all they're going to do is mow. Because all of our mowing and maintenance is done, majority of it, by part-time staff.
And we have no part-time
And we
staff.
have no part-time staff.
So that incremental capacity that we were talking about earlier is what we would be able to apply to mowing and maintenance and.
By full-time staff, that's
Right,
not their normal job.
Full-time staff that are currently on work share, but Ms. Pack's right, it wouldn't get us to senior programming and Parks and Rec programming and special populations. I mean, that, it's either a scheduling timing issue of when we get through the mowing season, or we then need to bring back part-time staff as well. And I know I'm repeating myself, but, the 88,000 hours of part-time went to zero. Mowing and maintenance, the actual mowing and maintenance full-time staff was at 19% by the time we got work share done. And that's what we articulated when we went into this, and that we are taking other staff and dedicating them to mowing and maintenance, but that's what's contributing to those two factors, or what's contributing to what you're
And
saying
I think
today.
Commissioner Hodges alluded to this. Obviously, it's much more economically feasible to do your mowing with part-time staff, obviously. Do we even know, is there part-time staff available out there to hire if we wanted to do mowing?
Yeah, well, two things. I mean, position by position, the hour that's spent mowing is more economical to pay a part-time person to
Right,
do
that's
that.
right.
But if you want to bring back full-time staff off a work share and then you want to hire part-time
No,
staff.
you couldn't do both. I mean, I'm saying if you
it-
did part-time and not bring, and that's.
So, given the scenario that we're in, we have I have not wanted to advertise, I have not want to have employees furloughed and on work share and meanwhile be advertising to hire part-time or full-time positions. I mean, if we're trying to minimize the size of our organization and our payroll, I've been trying to keep it with the people that are currently on our payroll, not add bodies to payroll. In response to your question about timing, I'd have to defer to Chris, or I guess it would be Chris, that might be able to speak to our ability to hire part-time.
I mean, I want to run soccer, obviously, that's why I'm here, so, and as far as, getting other things to work out, we'll make it happen, so
Right, but I think the question is our ability to hire part-time mowers at this point in time. I know that's always been a struggle, but Chris, what is our typical season for part-time employees? I mean, we've got kids going back to college, teachers going back to school.
Yeah, most of our staff usually by this time of the year are starting to run low on hours. But generally by the end of August, our mowing staff is about done. We have one or two that hang on that do, the grass usually isn't growing the way it is right now. I'm sure we could get a couple people to come back and mow, but most of our repeat staff that come back every summer have found other jobs for the summer. So, I mean, we could advertise, I'm sure we could find some, but we won't get our whole normal inventory of part-time employees.
From my perspective, the part-time issue is irrelevant. We need to bring people back and get them assigned to mowing and try to get that section caught up. It's been a wet summer. It's been a hard summer for taking care of this anyway. I acknowledge it's not as efficient as having somebody who's temporary seasonal or part-time doing the mowing for us, but it gets the job done, and that's what I'm concerned about. I think we need to address some of these pictures. I'm pretty sure most of us are getting fairly regularly from people taking pictures in the parks, and they're disturbed, you know. Now, I will say that when I've been out and around, you know, I was at Jerry Ivy Park the other day, and yeah, it was a little shaggy at the edges, but we had a guy out there mowing it, and it wasn't unacceptable. I mean, it was not what you'd normally see, but it was okay, and we were getting it taken care of. But I don't get around to near all of the locations in town, and obviously we're hearing from people who see the places that we're not getting to quite as often, and I just want to move forward with that, and I'd like to do that next week. I think that the financials will show that we're okay to start phasing back in. I'm perfectly fine with phasing programs in if we also take care of this other basic need.
I think the financials will show that we've not fallen behind as much as we projected, and you'll be left with kind of a discretionary decision about what you think the future might hold financially between now and the end of the year. But I think there'll be an opportunity to talk about bringing, my assumption was we'd be talking about bringing employees back off of work share.
I know we've kind of taken off a different direction, so I think we need to open it up to the public for comment. They've sat here and listened to us pontificate long enough probably, so I'd like to open it up for the public. If there's anyone here that'd like to comment on this soccer, please step to the podium and give your name and address if you would, please.
Sure. I'm Sula Ford. I live on Huntington Road here in town. One of my questions is, when I was at the last meeting, probably one before this, you had volunteers offer to go mow the public parks. Volunteer. What did you guys decide about that? I saw at least 2 or 3 men volunteer. Did you take them up on that offer, or is that not acceptable?
We have an opportunity for people to volunteer and trying to dedicate what they're going to do and where they're going to do it.
And the gentleman that gave you his card, his landscaping business, do you guys have something set up with him?
I don't know that we're intending for them to maintain the soccer fields, but
no, not the soccer fields, but you're talking about you don't want to do the soccer fields if you don't do the parks. The gentlemen's in the landscaping facilities that offered, or businesses that offer to do the parks on their own at no cost, that's the ones I'm saying, could they not come in and help you guys do that? And we can still do the parks out at, the soccer field.
I will say this, I was at the volunteer kickoff, was it 2 weekends ago? And the gentleman that you're referring to, he was there. I know that he has, as a volunteer, is going to be doing some work on the parks. For most of us, like, I have no skill set, we're pretty much limited to weeding, collecting trash. I think they said weed eating was okay, but obviously volunteers can't be involved in any like chemical applications or working in like in some of the medians that have a lot of traffic.
Yeah.
I mean, so
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the parks that you guys talk about, driving by Jerry Ivy and the Centennial Park, all that. We've had many people volunteer to go mow that public, the citizens, on a volunteer basis, and that's what I was asking if that was followed up on, and if that's an option. I can rent a weed eater. I have to do it at my house. I mow. I mean, I'm not going to get in the ditch. I'm not going to mow across the street in the ditch. I'm not doing that, but I can mow and do. So, I mean, I'm capable to help you out too. We used to go mow our own soccer fields just so we could go practice. So we know how to work. I mean, really volunteer. And I agree with you. They need to do the parks too. I mean, I live in this town. I want a pretty town. I don't just want a soccer field either. And as far as tournaments for your baseball and softball, if you market it right, you'd get tournaments here for soccer. You'd have the people in the hotels, you'd have them at the restaurants if you didn't have COVID-19. I don't know if that's ever going to happen again, but if you market it right and you get the word out, how many soccer tournaments would we go to out of town? We spend a lot of money, I know that I would love to spend in my own town. So you can get it like baseball and softball. You just have to know how to do it and put the effort in. That's all I have to say. I think it can be done. I'll help you mow the parks if it takes, getting the soccer field back. I mean, and I know there's a lot of other people that would help too. That's why I was wondering what happened with them.
We built a system where they can volunteer. We've reached out to them. What we haven't done is been able to come up with a schedule that we can have confidence that a facility will be mowed weekly by a volunteer.
Sergio Correa, 3101 South Lightville Road. Just on the financial aspect thing, being able to have these programs, my wife's here, she can attest to this. We go out to eat when we have games and practice during the week. We don't have time to make dinner. So the people that are participating in these sports, they're spending money in this community. And a lot of them already are waiting for this kind of deadline. If the Salina doesn't do anything with sports, they're going to go start playing leagues in Wichita and other towns. So they're going to start spending their money, but outside of this town. So yeah, we're not going to bring in the money, the baseball tournaments and things like that, but there is going to be some financial impact just on the numbers of the soccer community that we have. Just kind of, we'll point that out if, that hasn't been addressed, but, there's some financial stuff there as well that people could be overseeing, so.
No, and you'll bring one more thing to Salina. Championship high school football teams.
I was on the first South High soccer team back in 2001.
Okay, anyone else?
From a timing standpoint, if it's helpful, I think the only decision you would have to make relates to the fall season, not the indoor season.
Oh, yeah, I think this is a reasonable proposition. And having got 3 boys through indoor football, we used to go down by the place by the airport in Wichita almost every weekend. It does develop certain skills that you just can't do outside, you wouldn't want to do outside in the wintertime. It definitely sharpens your reflexes because that ball comes awfully fast. But if you're ready for a motion, Mr. Mayor, I move we approve reimplementation of the soccer program for the remainder of 2020 and authorize funding levels of $15,819 to cover costs associated with the soccer program as outlined in the presentation.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the implementation of the soccer program for the remainder of 2020 and authorize the funding level of $15,819, and so that does include the winter also.
Correct.
Okay.
I just wanted to be clear, so that does include the field house, resumption in the field house for the futsal?
Yes.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Nay. That is defeated 2-3. Is there any other motions anyone would like to make?
I would move that we approve the soccer programming for the fall season. I would not know what cost to, I don't know how those costs break down. Looked like it was about a 2-to-1 split there, but.
$9,679.
Without the futsal.
If I might have a question, Commissioner Davis, would you be willing to accept an amendment to your original motion that would allow us to review it next week after we see the financials, and if we can proceed with,
For the futsal indoor season, yeah, these guys, they're up against a real deadline for registration for the fall. I mean, because you really do have to do all those things that they described doing to get the fall season going.
Commissioner Davis, to answer your question, the proposed volunteer approach, the total direct, indirect costs would be $9,679. It's on the bottom of page 9.
And you show revenues of $7,000 to offset that, correct?
Correct.
So it's about a $2,000 cost to do the fall season.
And we could extend it to futsal later?
Yes.
Futsal registrations would begin middle third week of October.
Okay, so that is something that we could delay reasonably and still allow outdoor soccer to proceed at this point.
Yeah.
Correct.
For a net of about $2,000 in costs.
Correct.
And I would strongly urge, if we do that not all fields need to be mowed twice a week. That would save us considerable time with that number of teams. So is there another motion that someone would like to bring?
We approve soccer programming. Just a second. I'm reading from the wrong sheet. We approve re-implementation of the soccer program for the fall 2020 season and authorized funding levels of $9,679 to cover costs associated with this program.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve outdoor soccer, fall soccer, at a cost of $9,679, again with approximate revenues of $7,175. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that passes 5-0. See, we can compromise, guys.
Thank you, sir.
So, okay, and we'll address the other when we address the field house, so, okay.
Mayor, could we have a break?
Okay, how about a 7-minute break, and we'll be back here at 6:35.